This is a brief video clip from a conference event recorded at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., with speakers including America's 75th Attorney General, the Honorable Edwin Meese III, Honorable Becky Norton Dunlop, Natasha Southdorch, Judge Henry Saad, and Joel Anand Sami. For the entire video, please visit Adriatic Institute's YouTube page.
Well, thank you very much. Now we'll go to a time of questions. So if you do have a question, we have a microphone in the room. I'd like for you to wait until the microphone arrives, then give us your name, and if you're associated with an organization, an embassy, from visiting from abroad, let us know who you are and where you're from. Any questions? Okay, I see a questioner in the back.
For anyone on the panel, my name is Michael Zach. Question is, how can the Balkan countries look to the United States for help in establishing constitutional governance when the administration of our country is disregarding the law so much here?
Well, I think, let me, the judge, you spoke briefly about some of the challenges we have in our country. Let me just have you address that, and then Natasha or Joel, if you have comments.
I think the first thing to note about what's going on in our country is that the struggle to maintain the rule of law has always been there, right from the beginning. When Chief Justice Marshall of the Supreme Court, the most venerated justice ever in the United States Supreme Court history, held in Marbury v. Madison that it was the Supreme Court that got to say, let's say this is the Constitution, what the Constitution means. Jefferson, who believed in government with a small g, wrote a letter about his cousin, Marshall, distant cousin, who he despised, that they ought to take these guys out and hang them from the highest tree because that was the biggest power grab in the history of the United States, the rather short history. In other words, he believed, Jefferson did, that it's not the judiciary who should say what the Constitution means, whether legislation passed by Congress is constitutional. Congress should say whether it's constitutional. And of course, some believe that the president should say whether it's constitutional. So there has always been differences about where the power lies. The constitutional framework, though complicated, has been worked out fairly well over the last couple hundred years. Although I would recommend to anybody who's concerned about some of the current problems that have accumulated over the last 200 years, to read the Liberty Amendments, the recent book by Mark Levin, which talks about suggestions for modifications of the Constitution to remedy some of the problems that have come about as a result of what he regards as playing games with the Constitution in some quarters. But to your point, I think the world still looks to the United States as a beacon of hope and freedom and constitutional rule of law, where we all play by the same rules, are subject to the same rules. Are there going to be issues and problems throughout history currently where there'll be 100 years from now? Yes, but fundamentally the United States is a rule of law country. A judge here or there may go off the reservation and do precisely what he or she wants to do, but sometimes that judge will be overturned. The genius of our system, looking at the judiciary, for example, is that you have trial judges, 1, appellate judges, 3, typically Supreme Court judges in every state, 5, 7, or 9, as in the United States. So you have lots of eyes and minds working and looking at it, a lot of law clerks, a lot of professors, law schools. So people are not working in a vacuum, and whereas some people may want to do an end run around the law, and some of it is very obvious to those, and we think it's sad because you depreciate the rule of law when you flaunt it and you live in the first person singular as an executive. I will do this, I will do that, when we know the Constitution is meant to say it's we, the people, and the legislature passes something, the judiciary will interpret it, the executive branch enforces it, everybody has their role, but nobody is king. We don't want that to be eroded in this country, so a lot of people, like in this institution, are fighting to keep what is very precious and valuable. And I think it is the greatest, and there is still American exceptionalism, and I think countries around the world still look to the United States as a model, and we can help and still do. So while we may have fallen here or tripped there or have problems, it doesn't mean that we don't know what the right thing is and that we can't help those who are trying to do what they think is the right thing in Croatia and other countries. They can always point to us and say, isn't it hypocritical that you say X when you're doing minus X? But I think for the most part, the people in our country are law-abiding citizens who believe in fair play and want to see it apply to people equally. And despite flaws here and there, for the most part, I think for 200 years we've done a pretty good job. And I think the world recognizes that. And I still think we have the moral authority, therefore. You're going to have a Jefferson every now and then who says, this guy just did a great power grab. But we'll come back to the center. And I hope still be that shining light on the hill that Reagan talked about in 1980 at the acceptance speech.
Natasha, did you want to add anything?
Yes, right. I wanted to, from three angles. Practically, we realized that drug enforcement agencies broke actually the ring, the cocaine ring in the Balkans. U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Investigations raised an issue of Liechtenstein's bank being involved in money laundering from the U.S. side, which hasn't actually triggered any investigations in the Balkans, but it did in Germany. Thirdly, U.S. Security and Exchange Commission with the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act going after companies involved in bribing foreign officials in the Eastern Europe does bring results, but we have to see that translated in the region. From that, so practically U.S. was effective, and the only U.S. was effective in the region. On the other side, I think that this provides an example of where you are going to get if you do not uphold the rule of law. Because we see, if there is no rule of law, we do have a coexistence of organized crime and political corruption. And it is so obvious. It is because there's no rule of law. It is because there's no independent judiciary. And thirdly, it is very important also what Judge Saad said about we the people. This is so unique about U.S. Constitution. If you look at an attempt by European Commission, actually by the EU, to impose an EU constitution on all EU member states, it was called EU Lisbon Treaty. It wasn't passed, but practically it was passed in a different document. It's called differently, but trying to impose an EU constitution on all EU member states, which starts with the Queen Elizabeth of Great Britain, the Queen of Belgium, the President, the King, the President of Czech Republic, and so on, give these rights to the people. So we look up to the United States because it comes down to the people to say, we need the rule of law in our country, because if we don't have it, we're going to end up like the Balkans, like the rest of the world that doesn't have the rule of law.
Just to affirm
Joel?
what Natasha was mentioning is that American exceptionalism and what America certainly presents to the world is so important. Yes, we have our challenges here at home, but the rest of the world, when you look at Ukraine, you look at other parts of the world, and even in Asia, they certainly look up to the two documents that we have, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution. Those are unique documents. And as Natasha stressed, we the people, not we the government. And that's what we have in a lot of these post-communist countries, is that transition is certainly needs all the help from important corners to be able to move forward the advancement of the rule of law, to raise a new generation. I think that is so important. Judge Saad mentioned that as well, to raise a new generation that will take seriously the importance of upholding the rule of law, advancing it, and also advancing economic freedom.
And I think the final point I would just add, we have to be aspirational in our goals. And the one thing about our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence is it provides that aspiration. We people individuals were all fallen people, and so as we've heard from the panel, there are going to be challenges even here in the United States of America, but we always strive as a people to get back to that ideal. And the beauty of our Declaration and our Constitution is it does provide guidance for the rest of the world about something that works, where the government, as the Attorney General said, is supposed to defend the rights of people to be free and secure in their own lives. So aspiration's the key there. Okay, yes, sir, and then we'll move across the room.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Ranger. I'm with API, but I'm here out of interest in the subject. And I have a question for the panel. Is there not a symbiotic relationship between the rule of law and the dispersal of power? I'm thinking, Judge Saad, about your capturing of the experience of the Northwest Ordinance, which, among other things, favored the dispersal of property among many individuals as opposed to large land grants, where you have, and the experience of, that you spoke of, Mr. Nansami, about the you coming at privatization as opposed to the rule of law. The fact that you create 4 or 5 big hunks of private property doesn't necessarily mean you have a rule of law, because you have capital and wealth concentrated. So is there something that can happen in the independent Baltic republics that favors, encourages, protects, and acknowledges the rights of people in their property, in their persons, to help assure that dispersal of power?
Okay. One thing that happened with actually communism is that the property was denied, private property was denied. The real intentions of communists, and that's something that we actually talked about also last night, is that communists, to understand a communist, frankly, there was no ideology behind it. Most of it was just opportunism. We see it from today's perspective in Southeast Europe. So they just regrouped, did not change, they just transitioned into a new system that they called capitalism or market economy. So that people, that's why we have this backlash against capitalism, and we can't call it, if I call it capitalism in Croatia, it's a derogatory term. Even market economy is a derogatory term. So we're trying with private enterprise, perhaps that sounds a little bit better. But what I'm trying to say is that the property has not been restituted. The laws have been passed to cement the injustices because the legislation was taken, legislator power. Apparently, there's no separation of powers. So we have legislative, executive, and judiciary held by the same group of people that reigned during communism, and they changed their clothes. They became different. They haven't. And we have a situation that we don't have a market economy, that property has not been restituted back. Certain cases, yes, but larger properties, they're trying to actually stall it. And we do not have property rights. And that actually also the case of 860,000 backlog cases in Croatia's system shows that most of it is also property rights, shows that it's very hard to have certainty about investing in it. And how do you protect your property in Croatia? So that is a problem, also connected with the rule of law.
And as to the specific question about the interrelationship, the symbiosis between the rule of law and centralization of power, the Constitution was designed with Acton's admonition in mind. As you know, Richard, one of the brightest minds, Lord Acton, even though the Constitution preceded him, his sentiments were there, and that is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is why you have branches of government, which is why you have federalism, which is why the Constitution provided specific powers to the federal government, because they didn't want that to get too big. State government had its power, and then the people retained power, and then they had the Bill of Rights. So it is a design to disperse power, and the Northwest Ordinance the same thing. Rather than having large land grants to large groups of organizations, it dispersed it among the people. And that happened throughout the history of the United States, with the idea being that the more local control, the more local government, volunteerism, keeps at bay that huge central government that everybody's worried about because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, Lord Acton's admonition. Unfortunately, it's been shifting for the last 200 years in the other direction. And as you know, the Leviathan, which everybody warned about, where all the branches of government are in one, while you've just the alphabet agencies in the United States, where they make the rules, they enforce the rules, they break down your doors, they judge whether you're right or wrong, they throw you in jail. So all of a sudden, well, where's the separation of powers? And Mark Levin's book, a wonderful new book, deals with that very important question. That has to be corrected because we are going in the wrong direction. But nonetheless, the framework is meant to keep power dispersed, premised on Acton's admonition, and that is the symbiosis. And if in Croatia all three branches are in one, and then it's like Mugabe.
Right.
Would not you say also, in addition to the dispersal of power, that the concept of transparency is critical?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And that's why everything has to be done out in the open. And when you have, you know, if the president vetoes and the Congress comes back and all this is supposed to be done out in the open, if that's not done, if it's done behind closed door, the Star Chamber kind of rule of law or telephone justice. I remember when I talked to one of the judges in Croatia, in Zagreb in 2001, I said, well, you know, we have law books, we look up the law on computers and the precedent and to figure out what the law requires us to do in this particular dispute. What do you do? And she says, we make it up as we go along. And I thought, wow, that's, how do you apply the rule of law fairly, equitably to everybody on the thing, if you're making it up as you
Yeah.
know? They didn't have much to go on, understandably, so it's not meant as a criticism, but the rule of law is the antithesis of we make it up as we go along. The rule of law is the antithesis of I will do this because I happen to be the executive. No, you're one person, you're a steward for a short period of time. And that Congress passes legislation, you can't amend it on your own by a wave of, then you are becoming a dictator. And that's dangerous, and some people, even who teach common law, don't understand that.
Joel, did you want to add something there?
Just to briefly, in regard, when we look at the United States, the Constitution Declaration of Independence, and we compare that to what's going on in the continent of Europe, there is a gulf. You have the common law, which the UK and the United States apply, but in the continental Europe, it's totally different. And I think that becomes sort of that Achilles heel of what we see in Europe, and therefore a weak rule of law, as the judge was mentioning. If you don't have precedent, and the common law is unique in itself. And I think that's one of the benefits when you look at the Index of Economic Freedom. The countries or the jurisdictions that do well have actually embraced common law, and they're in the top 10. The countries that don't do not have that important rule of law and economic freedom.
Very good. I see another question here.
I have the same family name as Mara Letica, so we are relatives in a way. I had a minor role in establishing Croatian state. I was national security advisor to the first Croatian president, Tudjman. So I do appreciate what Adriatic Institute is doing, but being preoccupied with the dark side of reality and society, Natasha went too far. So I wouldn't like you to get impression that everything is negative in Croatia. I like Judge Saad's approach because he knows that his wife is a Croatian and she's a decent lady. So that is the majority of Croatians. So when speaking how to implement modern rule of law in Croatia, I wouldn't advocate importing judiciary culture from the United States, because there is also a dark side of the American judiciary. If you take only one indicator, that is a crime rate, it is 10 times higher in the United States than in Croatia, or 8 times higher in the United States compared to EU. So what I intend to say just that there are bright or positive side of Croatian reality, and comparing just 90s with 2014, we can say that we have made certain progress. As Natasha said, majority of grant or political corruption in Croatia is imported from neighboring countries. And she's right that due to American inhibitions and due to American reluctance to implement corruption methods, the American investors do have a problem investing in Croatia. All in all, I would say I would advocate another approach to developing judiciary in Croatia. It is also an American concept. It is called concept of usable past. So if we exclude 20th century of black and red totalitarian regimes, we do have our own judiciary and democratic tradition. And we can build a new Croatian judiciary tradition and new European free market economy on that usable Croatian and Balkan past. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your remarks. Let me just say, of course, if you've heard the Adriatic Institute present in other venues, there is a lot of focus on good that's going on there. And of course, the bottom line for all of us is people. I mean, we've talked about that in a number of things this morning. You have to have good people working together to create good government. But part of what we try to do here at Heritage is when we identify problems, transparency, we want people to understand the challenges that we face and that are faced in other parts of the world, because if you don't have this, if you don't shine a light on something, you can't get it fixed. So with that, let me turn it over to you for a response, and then we'll go down the line.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we just need to look at illicit financial outflows, for example, that were $15.2 billion in the period from 2001 to 2010, with much larger amounts that left the country between 1991 and 2001. If you look at the fact that $1.5 billion is leaving the country every year, that much Minister of Finance, Linić, just came in the States a month ago. He took a similar amount that annually leaves the country. So you see that the government is taking on a new debt so that the same amount of money can leave the country to tax corruption, tax evasion. People are taking on new debt that they don't need. They are paying more. No, sorry. No, they are paying higher taxes because they're just getting tax increase, and they are suffering. We have 22% unemployment in Croatia, 54% among the youth, based on UN report. So you see the situation that we have such corruption in the country that the budget is leaking out to tax evasion, corruption, and crime. On the other side, you have no new investments, because who's going to come to a country where you have to pay bribes at so many levels? You don't know how much is your investment going to cost you in the end. That's why we don't have new investments, so the budget is not getting filled up with the tax revenue. It's leaking on the other side. The budget deficit is 6% at this stage. 60% of debt is 60% of the GDP, I think, is debt. We have unemployment, as I mentioned, 22%, and growing. There's no way forward. We need to fix it. I mean, we need to fix it. We were talking the aspect of organized crime, the rule of law, for the sake of establishing normal democracy and market economy in Croatia. But when you talk to the people in Croatia, they are suffering. They are suffering. And it comes down to the rule of law and no protection of property rights.
Okay, Judge, and then Joel, you want to comment on this?
All right. I just wanted to mention, when we look at what's transpiring in Southeast Europe, and we just alluded to a brief moment about the EU enlargement program. Unfortunately, the EU enlargement program was deeply flawed. It just basically gave a checklist to countries saying, this is what we want you to do, and not to simplify the process, but of course, as Monica Macovei, the former justice minister, who was here at the Heritage Foundation from Romania, she mentioned at the cabinet meetings what people would do would say, well, we can certainly check off this list here. And as far as the implementation process was concerned, no one was really seriously focused on the implementation. Now, these issues would not be minor issues if you did not have the glaring concerns of about 1 million votes that were illegal voters on a list for a country of 4 million people. So while we criticize Russia, we have a nation, Croatia, with 1 million illegal votes, which is not only an EU member now, receiving taxpayer dollars from the EU, but also funding from the United States with the IMF and World Bank, as it will need in the days to come, but also the fact that this is hemorrhaging the economy and affecting people at the local level. And it's not just Croatia, it's Bosnia, it's Serbia, it's all these countries. And if we want these countries to be free, rule of law is important. We want them to be stable. Rule of law is important. And so I think that Richard Holbrooke's statement comes back to this whole process that we do need individuals of integrity. We do need individuals that deeply care about the lives of citizens, because it is, in effect, their responsibility, if they hold these offices, to make sure these precepts are advanced.
Well, thank you very much. That has to be the last word today. Let me remind all of you that Heritage does produce an index of economic freedom that covers some of these topics as important elements to having economic freedom in the world today. And of course, part of the reason, a main reason why we have programs like this is because we do deeply care about individuals around the world and what are the things that can be done to allow individuals to prosper in their own lives and with their own families. So thank you very much for attending. Those of you who are watching, thanks so much for being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you at another day at another program at the Heritage Foundation. Let's thank our panelists once again.
This is a brief video clip from a conference event recorded at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., with speakers including America's 75th Attorney General, the Honorable Edwin Meese III, Honorable Becky Norton Dunlop, Natasha Sardorch, Judge Henry Saad, and Joel Anand Sami. For the entire video, please visit Adriatic Institute's YouTube page.